Parenting. I'm your host, Greg Freeberry, and today we have special guest Hannah Ross on the show today, who is an educational therapist, and she's going to be talking a lot about executive functioning. And executive functioning is very important in this day and age. It's a fancy word, that kind of umbrella term that means, being able to organize your life, basically. So like show up to appointments on time, get homework turned in, calendar things, and just like kind of schedule out and plan for the future. So Hannah's going to share a lot about her experience and advice for helping out with executive functioning, in particular for students that struggle with that kind of stuff. So it's going to be another great episode today, and I'm excited to present to you Hannah Ross. Hello, welcome to Pandemic Parenting. I'm Greg Freeberry, your host, and I'm here today with Hannah Ross,
Hello.
Educational therapist. We're really excited to have her on the program today. She's going to be talking to us a lot about executive functioning. Hannah, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Excited to share with your audiences today.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Usually I like to start the show with just like a few rapid fire questions, just so everyone can get to know you. So I'm thinking, since we have these right here, what's your favorite flavor for sparkling water? How about that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I found sparkling water, there's either the purists who only like lime, or there's the people who like every single random flavor.
Right,
which is
right.
I just like any random flavor. I get a different flavor every time, so I like to try them all.
Okay.
No specific favorite.
So you don't have a favorite?
I'm just I like to dabble every single kind.
Okay, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Do you have a favorite role model in your life?
Oh, that's a hard one. But I'd say, my parents are both role models for me, of course, but they're both educators, and probably part of the reason I got into education.
Okay, amazing. And do you have a favorite country you've traveled to before, and why?
That's a great question. I absolutely love to travel. It's one of my passions. I recently traveled to Slovenia this summer.
Wow, okay.
It was amazing.
That's a rare one.
I know. I had it was kind of random, but we went there to do some hiking, and we're totally blown away with how absolutely gorgeous the hiking was, the natural beauty. They also had an amazing food scene, so highly recommend Slovenia for travel.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Croatia a while back,
Yeah.
and I thought it's this old Eastern Bloc Soviet Union country, and it was all ruins. It was actually really beautiful. It had islands and forests, and it was really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that area of Europe. So.
All right, and then what's your number one self-care tip?
Yeah, I do. I am a big believer in self-care. I think just taking time for self-care for yourself every day. I mean, that's an obvious one, but figuring out what you like to do for self-care. I really like to exercise and be active and be outside. So self-care for me will look like, going to a yoga class or walking my dog. And those are just parts of my daily routine. So I'd say make self-care part of your routine.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of just movement in general, and I used to do hot yoga pre-pandemic. I haven't got back into it since then, but it was one of my favorite activities, just to kind of get sweat out the toxins and all that stuff.
For sure.
All right, cool. So first thing I want to talk to you about is you were a classroom teacher, right? Back in the day, and then now you've made this transition into educational therapy. So I was just curious about your journey from that till now.
Yeah, for sure. So I was a classroom teacher for about 5 years. I taught 3rd grade and 4th grade, and I absolutely loved being a classroom teacher. I think it's amazing to get to work with a group of kids and connect with them in that way. There's lots of energy and excitement. It's also a really, really hard job. So shout out to all the teachers out there, hardest job ever.
Agreed.
But then just in my role as a classroom teacher, I definitely just noticed that some students each year just really weren't getting the support they needed in the classroom environment. And really, no matter how much I could differentiate or work in small groups, their needs were they just weren't in the same place developmentally as other students. And they needed some really one-on-one support and remediation and strategy building to help them become successful. And I kind of just saw that disconnect time and time again of just students whose needs I couldn't meet in the classroom environment, which is what led me to kind of look into what might fill that gap. And that's how I found educational therapy,
Okay.
which I absolutely love. And I mean, most people don't know what educational therapy is. So
yeah, I mean, if
I'm
you want to
happy,
explain
I'm happy
about
to
it a little
explain
bit,
it.
yes.
It's amazing. Educational therapy is, or educational therapists like myself, work with students one-on-one who learn differently. So a lot of times this looks like working with kids with learning differences like ADHD or dyslexia, autism, processing challenges, or also kids who just don't have a diagnosis, but they are learning different from their peers for some reason, and they're experiencing difficulties, and they need either some intensive specific remediation or some strategy building and coaching to kind of help them be their most successful learners. So educational therapy really strives to look at the whole child, their academic profile, their strengths, their weaknesses, their interests, their mindset, and really tries to provide support to help those students become their most successful learners. So it's one-on-one academic and therapeutic sessions, kind of really tailored to each learner's needs. And ed therapists like myself, because after being a classroom teacher, I went back to school for educational therapy and did training programs in other a couple of other skill areas. So educational therapists also do have training specifically in working with learners with learning differences and looking at those neuropsych reports and diagnoses and accommodations.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. That was a great summary, I think. Because, it is like kind of this like holistic approach helping. And it's great that you work with kids with disabilities and stuff. Like I work with a lot of those kids too sometimes. And it's like they need that extra intervention sometimes. It's great that you're here to help. So have you found that your classroom experience has really like aided in your educational therapy practice?
Yeah, 100%. I think, honestly, it's like the best training I could have had to be an educational therapist, because I know what it's like to be a classroom teacher. I know how hard it is, and I just know that no matter what, there's just going to be some kids who have different needs than the rest of your group of students, that no matter what, it's really hard to really meet those needs and the constraints of curriculum and whatnot. So I understand what teachers are going through and feel really empathetic towards that challenge. I also understand what students are going through, and I've seen those students struggling in that classroom environment, so I can kind of see from both sides. And really, I think that helps in communicating with teachers, parents, and students. Absolutely. I kind of know exactly where they've been, and just overall, I know what curriculum looks like throughout the grades. I know what kind of skills are expected for students to learn and be successful in, and that being said, what kind of accommodations might help them really thrive in that classroom environment. So yeah, I'm so grateful for my classroom teaching experience. I learned so much from doing that, and I have so much respect for all the classroom teachers out there.
Yeah, I mean, I tried a shot at it for a year and a half, and I think I might have stayed at it for longer, but then like the pandemic happened, and like it was like mid-year, I was like learning to become a new teacher, and then all of a sudden I had to learn to become a new teacher again online, and then I tried to do it again the next year, and I was like, oh, I think my like skill set is better tailored to just like the one-on-one kind of atmosphere. Yeah. But I do really appreciate, like I learned a lot about like a different demographic of the student population, just being in like the general class setting. So I was like really appreciative of my experience and my time there. Yeah. All right. So why are you so passionate about what you do?
I personally, I love learning. And, when we think about our lives, we spend most of our lives learning, whether it's in a school environment, up through high school or college, and even beyond that in our jobs and in our personal lives. We're always learning new things and really putting the new things we learn into play and action in our lives. So I think learning in itself is such a big part of our lives that we don't always think about, especially after we end school. And I think the learning experience also has a huge impact on students. Of course, their academic development, but also their social emotional development, their confidence, their mindset, their view of themselves as well. And so if a student is having, a negative experience at school or struggling at school for some reason, that's really, causing a ripple effect in other areas of their lives, and really causing them to, in general, usually struggle with anxiety, depression, just resistance to trying. And it's really sad to see that in students when that really doesn't have to be the case. So I, have seen firsthand that students can struggle and that learning is really, really hard for some students and some families. That's totally normal, but there is help out there. And I know that with intensive remediation for some students, with strategy building, with the right supports, students can get on the right track and they can really gain confidence in their learning and enjoy learning. And really my ultimate goal in my practice is for students to enjoy the learning process. We really seek to make it engaging and accessible. Because that's really what learning should be. It shouldn't just be like writing down worksheets and doing that, but it should be hands-on. It should be meaningful, applicable to their lives. So I kind of strive to bridge that gap, and I really want to see students feel confident and feel like they can achieve and succeed, not just in school, but on whatever the next step of their life is going to be.
Yeah. So what's it like, like I've experienced this when that moment where like it's all of a sudden like it clicks for a kid or something, they kind of like light up. Have you ever experienced that before?
For sure. And that's a great moment. I think, especially when it comes to one of my favorite areas of support right now is instruction for students with dyslexia. So I do a lot of intensive reading remediation. So when you kind of get to see a student decode or blend a word for the first time, it's amazing when they finally read their first sentences, their first chapter books. It's really, really cool because that's a really hard journey that takes a lot of work. But when there is that aha moment, when that light bulb goes off, it's so rewarding, and it's really cool to see students feel that as well.
Totally. All right, so I just wanted to cut in there for a minute and emphasize the point Hannah's making about making the learning process fun. Humans, one of our natural states, especially as kids, is just to have fun. Just to have that natural curiosity, not take things too seriously, and just explore. And I feel as adults, sometimes we get a little too serious. We got jobs to go to, we got bills to pay, and we lose touch with the reality that, life is just one big game. We're all just playing one big game, and that, things are supposed to be fun a lot of times. So in school, that translates to the learning process not always being the most fun or exciting or interesting. So I always try and make my lessons as fun as possible by telling little jokes or making silly faces with my students, or even sometimes just like getting up and moving around and doing a little yoga or whatever. Just make it like lighthearted. It doesn't have to be like, all right, we're just going to do this homework and we're going to drill it into you, and your education's so got to be so difficult. Because, if your student or your child ends up learning to not love learning, then they're not going to engage with the process as much. And then they may miss out on some incredible learning opportunities, which would be a real tragedy. So naturally, kids are going to gravitate to one area of interest versus another. Maybe they really like English, but they hate math. But there's still ways to try and make it fun. So just always keep that in mind. I think it's so important that we don't lose touch with having fun, especially while we're learning. So try and keep it lighthearted, try and keep it fun, and don't get too caught up in grades. It's more about the process than the results, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, now Hannah's going to start talking more about executive functioning. So this is the meat and potatoes of today's interview. So let's get back to it. I want to shift gears a little bit now and just talk about, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I was just talking to someone in New Zealand last week, and they're in lockdown. There's a lot of countries that are still in lockdown right now. And so this has been, like a once in a century event, it's really impacted people. So I'm just curious, like, how have you seen families being impacted by the pandemic in your practice?
Yeah, and I do think, one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic, and maybe it's just from my perspective, has been on learning and school systems. I think it's been really hard for schools to navigate this, the transition to and from virtual learning, hybrid learning, and just all the ramifications of this. I think, with the virtual learning and a lot of uncertainty for the last year and a half, I think that did certainly interrupt the learning for some students. And so students didn't necessarily meet the, curricular goals of their, certain grade levels. Because instruction changed. And schools weren't necessarily prepared for it.
They're very reactive from what I experienced.
And students, just some students just didn't learn in the virtual medium as well. So, a lot of families have kind of seen learning interrupted, and because of that, they're really seeing a lot of learning loss in their students, and kind of wondering what to do now. Like, now that we're you know I want to say we're back to normal. I guess we're not quite. But now that we're back in person to school, like, what can I do to help my student? How worried should I be about this? So I do see just a lot of anxiety and worry in parents as they see their students come back to the school learning environment, and really that's where I come in, and other professionals come in to really kind of walk alongside those families, and decide what they should really be worried about, what is normal, and then what we can do to kind of help make things better.
Awesome. What are some of the things that you can, like, is it for students to do, or is it for parents to do, or can they do things together? Like, what are some
Yeah,
of
well, I think one of the things we're going to talk about today is executive function skills. So
Okay.
I can kind of jump into that, because I guess these are all quite related. Executive function, I'm not sure if it's something you've chatted about before.
I've never talked about it on this show yet.
Okay,
so
great.
If
Well,
you want to
let's
explain,
deep
I mean,
dive.
I'm familiar, but
like, let's deep dive, because it's huge, and it's kind of like, not a new thing, but it's newer in our common vocabulary and terms, and I do think the pandemic have brought to light a lot of executive function challenges and made those worse. So, executive function, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a set of skills that we all have in our brains, and these skills are kind of like the CEO of your brain, or the coach of your brain. I will kind of say they're really responsible for getting everything done, right? And you're welcome to jump in here. So executive function skills is kind of this umbrella term for skills including organization, time management, planning and prioritization, working memory, attention and focus, goal-directed perseverance, self-reflection, flexibility. So all of these really, really important skills. And if you think about those skills, we, even as adults, we use those skills constantly in our lives. To make a meal, you have to be able to organize the supplies you need, right? Plan when you're going to make it, and plan to go to the grocery store if you need to get something else. You have to manage your time, make sure you have the time to do it. You follow the steps correctly, you cook at the right amount of time, you have to initiate the task. So executive functions are involved in absolutely everything: making a meal, planning a party, getting from one place to another in your car. They're also a huge component of school for students. Executive function are huge parts of students' lives when it comes to studying for a test, turning in homework, completing projects. Really everything students are doing is using these executive function skills, which are actually not developed in the brain until the age of 25. So our students and learners are expected to do all these really, really difficult tasks, but they don't necessarily have all the skills, developed to do those things. And these executive function skills aren't necessarily taught in school, or not explicitly taught, as you know, and so oftentimes there's a disconnect between what a school is asking students to do and what the student actually has the ability to do. So if you're a parent listening and you're thinking, like, I wonder if my child is struggling with this, I'd say some signs that a child is struggling with executive function is that child who completes all their work but doesn't get turned in. It's crumpled off in the bottom of their backpack, right?
So well.
Or the student that waits till the last minute to start the project. Maybe they knew they had that project, they just didn't want to do it. Maybe they completely forgot. So now the night before the project, it's absolute chaos in your household. Everyone's scrambling to get this done, right? It's the student who is always forgetting where their assignments are, where their jacket is, leaving their lunchbox at school. The student who has a really disorganized backpack, workspace at home and school. A student who might have difficulty kind of looking at a big task like completing a book report or writing an essay, and just really doesn't know where to begin that task or how to break that into manageable steps. So if your student is struggling with any of those things, that's like a sign of executive function struggles, and it's not at all related to intelligence. So executive function and intelligence are not related. You can be an incredibly bright student and really still struggle in these areas.
I think, like, I was very successful in school
Mm-hmm.
because I was largely like organized, and I had like my file folder and my 5 subject notebook, and everything
Yeah.
was labeled, and like I took notes in a certain way that made sense to me. And I was just kind of like took it for granted that,
Mm-hmm.
everyone could do that. Right? Like I was just like, right, you just like label this is history and this is math and like boom, done. But now I'm experiencing all these kids, and like I used to get frustrated because like they would, like you said, like they do their work but then they like just
Yeah.
wouldn't turn it in or something, or like they would have an F. They'd be very intelligent, but they'd have like an F because they just like were missing their assignments because they didn't go and check the portal or whatever. And I was like, are these kids just lazy, or like, they like doing this on purpose? But then I've come to realize that no, it's just like they just have these executive functioning challenges. So now I've learned
Yeah.
to be way more compassionate and understanding, because not everyone can just like calendar well, or like put in,
Yeah.
put a appointment into their phone and all that stuff. So it's important.
Definitely. I think you bring up a good point. Some students are naturally good at these without having to learn. It just comes naturally. They know how to use that planner. They're, naturally keeping their papers in their folders.
Yeah.
And some students not so much. The opposite is true. And particularly for students with, a learning difference, whether it's ADHD or a processing deficit, that's a common struggle if there is a further learning diagnosis. So
Mm.
the kids who are naturally good at executive function practice these good habits all the time, right? So they get better at them. They get better at planning for the big project and organizing their notes. And so as they reach high school, they're pretty good at these skills, where the students who aren't naturally strong at executive function never even learn these skills. They don't practice them. Maybe one time someone tells them to use a planner, but they don't really even know what that means.
Yeah.
And so then the gap really widens
Mm.
between, who has executive function skills and who is still lacking in that area, which, I think during the pandemic, a lot of families have noticed their students struggling in the area of executive function. Parents have gotten to see, for better or for worse, a firsthand view of their learners in their virtual classrooms.
Yeah.
And they've seen, like, oh, wow, this is how my student goes about the school process. Like, wow, this is wonderful.
Uh-huh.
Or, wow, this is really challenging. I see some clear executive function skills of time management or organization or planning really lacking that seem to be holding them back. So I think the pandemic really brought to light a lot of those executive function struggles in many homes. And I know I've talked to many parents since then who really, because of the pandemic, were able to get a glimpse at these skills, and now are kind of wondering what's next.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. That's like, yeah, now it was maybe obscured before, but parents
Mm-hmm.
can kind of see, oh, well, now I can see the gaps because I can see them going through the school process. Okay, so I have a couple quick stories I wanted to tell about executive functioning. The first one was I used to volunteer at a hot yoga studio, and there was someone there that I worked with, and we had this like fancy water bottle filter system where the yogis could come in and fill up their water bottle before they go to class. But there's a little light on there, and then when it went from green to red, you had to change the filter out. So I was kind of like working around, cleaning up the bathroom or whatever, and then I heard like light cursing coming from over where the water bottle system was. And I went over, and this person that I was working with, she was trying to, get the water filter off, and she was struggling, and she had the directions right in her hand, and she couldn't figure it out. And she was like, I can't figure this thing out. These directions are stupid, blah, blah, blah. I'm over it. And I was like, oh, do you mind if I try? And then, so I sat down and I looked at the directions, and I just followed the directions step by step. And I replaced that filter it probably wasn't even 5 minutes. It was probably less than 5 minutes, and I got it all done. And that was very shocking to me, because this was a woman that had just passed the LSAT and got into law school. So it wasn't like she was unintelligent in any sort of way. She was very intelligent, and yet she really struggled with just following these step-by-step directions. Another time, another one of my close friends, also a lawyer, funny enough, I don't know if this is just a thing with lawyers, but he was trying to put one of those like phone protector things on, those little like plastic sleeves that you put on the face of it so it doesn't get scratched or smudged up. And he's like trying to figure it out and he can't do it. And I'm like, well, did you read the directions? And he's like, no, I read them for like 2 seconds and I just tossed them aside. And it really became apparent to me that the simple task of just following step-by-step directions can be incredibly difficult for a lot of people. And that's something that I like just totally took for granted, because I was like, oh, well, it was something I was always good at. I was like, oh, right, you just do step one, and then you do step two, and then you do step three, and then you just keep doing all the steps until you get to the end. And I think, I learned that from doing a lot of Legos probably as a kid, because doing the Legos, it's all, this is step one, this is step two, step three. And I didn't realize it was a skill. And I didn't realize it was a skill that not everyone could do well, because I thought it was just like something natural, like, oh, you just read it and you do it. There's a lot of people out there that, they can be very intelligent, like Hannah said, but not necessarily have the executive functioning skills to be able to execute even tasks like following a set of step-by-step instructions. And that's why, again, Hannah was mentioning, like, someone like me that was just kind of naturally good at it. I didn't even realize I was really executing well in these executive functioning skills. Well, in school, like, I'm constantly planning and having to do homework and studying for tests and completing projects. So I'm reinforcing all of those good positive habits that I have. While a student that maybe doesn't have great executive functioning skills, well, they haven't really been taught it, and they're constantly reinforcing maybe some of the negative habits that they have. So that's why it's so important to interject early and intervene early and get students on the executive functioning path of like learning the skills and strategies necessary to really get that stuff down. Because like Hannah said, it's like part of our, even if just simply cooking dinner, you have to plan, right? Well, what ingredients do I need? How long is it going to take? When are my kids going to be hungry? Well, I got to start it at this time. Then there's a lot of planning, but we can just kind of gloss over it because it's like, oh, well, I'm cooking dinner every single day. So it's just something that I do. And we don't realize how much our brain is really doing behind the scenes there. So just saying, like, getting in early. And if you do notice that your kids are having some struggles with executive functioning, it's really important to intervene early and really get them some strategies for helping their executive functioning skills and building them up. And Hannah will share some of the ways that you can do that. So keep staying tuned here. So are there any like tips or strategies you have for parents or students that they can kind of implement at home to kind of help improve executive functioning skills?
Yeah, and I'd say there's lots of things you can do. I mean, I think a big one is teaching learners what executive function skills are. Your child most likely does not know that term. So it's important to actually teach it and say, like, hey, these are some really important skills: planning, perseverance, organization, time management, memory, persistence. These are really important skills that really successful people have and need. To teach them about those skills, to kind of teach them that they're not necessarily natural, and to kind of even brainstorm with your student, what are some of your executive function strengths and what are your executive function challenges? Because we all do have executive function strengths. I'm really good at planning. Like, I love to plan things.
Okay.
But I'm really not so great at organization. Like, I can keep things organized, like, on
to
the
an
front,
extent,
to
to
the
a point,
extent, but then open my closets. There's stuff everywhere. Like, my Google Drive is not as organized as I'd like it to be. So organization is still, and even though I know that, I try to compensate for it, but it's still kind of a weakness of mine. So I think it's good to have those conversations with students and to kind of say, okay, what are you good at? What are you struggling with? And kind of self-reflect on that, for yourself as a parent and also for learners. Kind of after that, you can work on setting goals for students. Now, you can't change everything overnight. I wish you could, but choosing like one specific problem you want to address, whether that's, I really want to make sure that the math homework all gets turned in, so we're not missing points for that, right? So setting a goal that's very, very specific that we can then create a system or strategy to make sure it happens. So after that goal is set, come up with a plan with your student. What can we do? Can we make like a Google Drive checklist every time? Can we like create a new section of your binder for the homework? Can we put a reminder on your phone every morning when you walk into math class to turn this on? So there's lots of different strategies and tools that could work. It's about finding what's right for your student. So I'd say picking a goal and setting a plan to try to reach that goal, and kind of reflecting to see what happens. Those are really important. In addition, just as a parent, modeling executive function in your household is really important.
Okay.
Once again, these skills aren't natural, so we
Right.
all use these all the time, right? But your kids don't know that you're using executive function skills to plan what time you need to leave the house to get to their basketball game on time. They don't know that. So even kind of verbalizing that process, oh, I'm looking ahead at traffic. Okay, if I want to get there by 5 p.m., here's what I have to do first, and kind of backwards planning out loud with your students so they can kind of see that process. And just modeling that process of planning ahead and breaking things into chunks frequently. That can happen as you're, planning a holiday dinner for your extended family. Kind of talk with get your child to help you and say, okay, what are all the steps we have to do in order to have these 10 people over on Thursday for Thanksgiving dinner? So kind of work on those together and talk through those processes. Another way to model executive function skills is like bring calendaring into your life. I'm a big proponent of calendars.
Yep, same.
Whether it's a shared like family Google Calendar where everyone puts their different events in, or just like I always had growing up, like a big whiteboard calendar on the wall where where the things to look ahead to were written up there. That just shows learners that here's what calendars are used for. They're updated regularly. They benefit us in this way, and kind of gets that habit going for students, because many learners think, I don't need a calendar, I'm just going to remember it, but we know that's not true.
Right.
So that's a good good strategy I like to put in place. You can also get systems in place, like a time for organization, like the first Saturday of each month, everyone has a specific area of the house they organize, and so we do these couple things to organize. After we organize, take a picture of the beautifully organized area and like set it up there so we can look back at it as a reference throughout the month to kind of try to keep it like that. So some of those, like time management, calendaring, and organizational systems can kind of naturally start to help your student develop those skills, I'd say. And just, of course, checking. One of the biggest thing is just have grace on your student, and just know it's not that they're lazy or unmotivated. It's that they're probably just really struggling with these things. They actually don't know how to plan ahead. They don't know how to start this really hard task. And they might need some steps to get there. So if you can talk to your student about how they can, write things in their planner so they know what's coming in advance, how they can look ahead at this big English essay and make a checklist of all the little baby steps that need to be completed in order to finish that essay. So have grace on them and know that they're not trying to, they're not trying to mess this up. They're trying their best, but no one's really ever taught them these skills. So if your child's open to it, kind of work together to break things up and kind of set goals and provide systems you can kind of check back in as well.
All right. Brilliant advice. I really like the piece about like verbalizing, because you're going to be thinking about those things anyway. So it's just like helpful to just kind of put it out there so your kids can model it for your kids.
And you can even verbalize your weaknesses or things that, like if you have an executive function failure, we all do it as adults. Oh my gosh, I completely forget to put that in my calendar. Now I've forgotten to meet my friend for lunch. This is such a bummer. Wow. If only I use my calendar better. So you can verbalize your mistakes too and show your child you're not perfect.
Right.
Sometimes our mistakes are really our biggest learning opportunities.
Absolutely. So I know it probably varies from student to student, but I've done a little work helping kids with executive functioning, and I think it's important to talk about, like, we'll set a plan and then you may not see results right away, right? So like I think sometimes parents get frustrated, like, oh, this isn't working, and they just like discard it. How long do you think it usually takes to kind of like get these skills built up and implemented and habitualized?
That's a good question. And it's going to take longer than you want.
That's
for sure.
Of course.
And for every student, it's different. But especially if there's a student who this is a particular struggle for them, it takes time. It could take weeks, months to get a system in place. If it's even something as simple as, using a planner consistently is a habit that a student just really most students, especially those who struggle in this area, can't just be taught once, this is how you use a planner, but they need to be retaught, reviewed multiple times, so that habit becomes really, really natural.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say every skill you're trying to work on, give it 3 months to see if it's stuck. And that's why I recommend only trying one thing at once.
Yeah.
You can't set goals like I need my student to get all their homework turned in, study in advance for every test, be early to school. You can't set all those goals. I really wish you could.
Change, right?
But setting those one goal and really working towards that, and every day giving the reminders and that practice. If you're working with your learner on something like how to manage big projects and how to prioritize, every single time they have a project, chat about the project, sit in front of your computer together and make a checklist of all the steps that they'll need to complete to get to their end goal, starting with the end in mind. Do this not just for one project, but for every time they have a project. Do it for something they can help you with at home as well, because if you keep on doing these things, it will become normal and it will become a habit. You can think of this kind of like you're a math guy, like a long division problem. When students are learning long division, they don't just do one problem and now they know it. They must do like how many reps?
Yeah, you got to do hundreds sometimes.
Hundreds, right? So it's like that. Hopefully you won't have to do this 100 times, but maybe you will. So learning these skills is just like that, right? It takes a lot of repetition, especially for students to become independent enough for them to do it on their own. And there's also, for each student, I would say maturity is different and motivation is different. If you have a student who is feeling more motivated and willing to learn these skills, it's probably going to be easier. If you have a student who's really resistant and hasn't really quite admitted, like, hey, I need help, that's going to take longer. So that's why it's impossible to say a specific answer. Just know it takes longer than you want. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. Yeah. I just want to put that out there because I notice sometimes parents get frustrated because they don't see like the result. Like, oh, we put it in the calendar. Shouldn't they be like getting their work in on time? It's like, I gotta habitualize it. It takes a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I just wanted to touch on a couple of points Hannah just made there. First of which is to just keep things simple and just focus on one goal at a time. In my experience, when I was working as like a online health and diet coach, I'd have so many clients that would come in, especially at the beginning of the year, and be fired up, ready to lose weight, and they were committed to changing their diet and eating healthy and then getting to the gym and exercising and just being health conscious and all that stuff. Well, that's fantastic. And I'll also say for many people, that is a recipe for failure, unfortunately, because prior to that, they weren't really exercising at all. They were eating garbage, just getting fast food or eating sweets and candy. And to go from, say, like not really exercising, eating unwell, to like eating salads and skipping meals, doing intermittent fasting, and then working out at the gym for an hour every single day. Those are like major lifestyle changes, and our bodies and brains are designed specifically to not change, right? So the brain wants to conserve as much energy as possible. So that's why we have a bunch of shortcuts and we have routines, and your brain wants to go back to those routines constantly. So it takes a huge amount of energy to change your lifestyle in like such a significant way. Now, if you're really committed, you certainly can do it. It's not impossible. But what I found helps way better is, like Hannah was saying, just start with like one small thing. So that makes it almost impossible to fail. Because again, people would be like, they maybe would start off eating really well, eating their salads and going to the gym, but then it's like one day they have a little fast food. And then they skip the gym, and then they get down on themselves and they shame themselves, and then they're like, well, this will never work, and then it's a spiral down back to where they were. So it like starts with one little slip up, and then like the whole thing's out the window. So what I noticed helps better is actually just being like, all right, well, how about I just go for a 1 minute walk? All right, so that's like literally impossible to fail. Like anyone can find time for a 1 minute walk, and you do a 1 minute walk for 3 days, and then you do a 2 minute walk for another 3 days, and then you do a 5 minute walk. And then, you just slowly build this up until you're walking for an hour a day. And then maybe you switch the walking to an hour a day to like actually lifting weights for 5 minutes. And so I call this tiny habits, right? And you stack them and you build them. It changes habits gradually over time than trying to make these wholesale life changes, which are very, very difficult to stick with. But building on top of habits here and there it's actually a much, much better long-term strategy to actually get the lifestyle change you're looking for. So that was my weight loss example. But when we're talking about executive functioning and you're working with your kids, again, like Hannah said, maybe just set a goal that, all right, we're going to get all of our homework turned in on time this week. Okay. And then your child can just focus on that one thing, that one specific goal. And then once that becomes habitualized, then you can start working on some other things. Again, where if you're like, you got to get your homework in time, you got to study, in advance for tests, you got to get your project done 2 weeks in advance, blah, 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 all this stuff. That can be a major lifestyle change. That can be overwhelming for a lot of students. And it's going to cause them to just resist even harder. Where if you keep things very, very simple, hopefully the resistance will be minimal and ideally not at all. So that was the first point. And then what else did we talk about? Oh yeah, the checklist. So this is a small thing, but there's a really amazing book called The Checklist Manifesto, if you've never heard of it. It's really fascinating about how there's these highly, highly trained and highly intelligent people, such as like surgeons and doctors and nurses, and then like pilots and stuff like that, where, these people go through years and years of training. They're very competent at what they do. And then they even have, these are like senior people sometimes where at like, say, a hospital, surgery errors were becoming a problem at the hospital. And all they did was introduce a checklist and just a checklist of what you're supposed to do every single surgery. And then the nurses run through it with the doctors, and then they just confirm every single thing, and they just check it off one by one. And the crazy thing is it's like, there's nothing on the checklist that the doctors and nurses didn't already know about. Like, they're seasoned professionals, they've been through the training, they know that they're supposed to do all of these things. But just having the checklist reduced surgery errors by like 70% or something. I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's like a crazy number. Like, it's crazy how just like a simple checklist really just literally saved lives. It saved so many lives because there were way less surgery errors at this particular hospital. Same kind of thing with the pilots. Just having a simple checklist that they run through every single time reduces the amount of, in-flight problems that the airplanes go through, and it really increases safety. So, it may seem like a lot of work, but checklists can be really, really powerful. And I recommend that you check out that book. So I use checklists in my day-to-day life as well, just for even things that I'm already familiar with. Like, I'll just run down the list. Oh, yep, did that, did that, did that, did that. And it's just a kind of like, for me, it feels like a way just to offload some stuff. So it's just like, I don't even have to think about it. It's on my checklist, and then I can just mindlessly, like, well, not mindlessly, but like, I don't have to worry about, did I miss a step? Did I forget something? You just go boom, 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 right down the checklist. So those are a couple of things that I really wanted to touch on, because they're small, but they can be incredibly powerful if harnessed in the correct way. So I just wanted to interject and share my thoughts on those couple of things. So let's get back to Hannah. So now I just want to talk about, like, if, as a professional, like, in your opinion, when do parents need to seek out, like, an educate? Like, what's the difference between, like, oh, they just missed a couple of homework assignments, and, oh, they're, like, deficient in their executive functioning skills? And, like, so when would they need to seek you out? And then how would parents even go about, like, getting educational therapy services?
Yeah. I think if it's a pattern that you see over an extended period of time, that's when you can consider getting support. I'd say if it's not just like a week or two or one project, but months over months, you're noticing these patterns happen, of missed assignments, struggling with big projects, things slipping through the cracks. over time, that's probably something to pay attention to. And oftentimes that can happen when there is a big transition for kids. A lot of kids are experiencing this going back to school after the pandemic. When students transition to middle school or high school, that's often a time where the level of executive function needs change. So that can be a good time for parents to reach out because things are kind of new. I'd say in addition, if you're seeing all these challenges with your child, but your child is resistant to getting help from you, which we see all the time, right? Students don't want to get help from their own parents, unfortunately. So I'd say if students are resistant to getting help, and if it's kind of getting in the way of the parent-child relationship, if it's really causing conflict and arguments, and really not helping your relationship better develop in that way, why not just get professional help, right, to make it better, and have someone outside come in and tell you what strategies to work on and what to try. And I'd say if you're just feeling frustrated in any way or overloaded as a parents have so much going on, that outside support can really help just kind of take it off your plate and help students develop these skills kind of more explicitly with some outside help that can also help you navigate the school system and what kind of accommodations might help them if necessary moving forward.
Okay. And can they just like go through a school, or is there like a directory of educational therapists that they can find?
Yeah. So I'd recommend, if you're looking for an educational therapist, and I'd say educational therapists specialize in a lot of different things, but many educational therapists do work with the executive function, and that's definitely a big area of support we provide. So you can definitely Google search educational therapists in your area. You can search on AT online, that's Association of Educational Therapists.
Okay.
They have an online search functionality to see educational therapists in your area. And you can always reach out to me at hannahross.edtherapy@gmail.com just to kind of hear more about, my specific offerings in my practice, as well as, what might be the best fit for you, because, different ed therapists are a better fit for different students. So I'd say searching on AAT online, asking your school for a recommendation for an educational therapist could be a good idea, or your neuropsychologist if your child has done an assessment. Reaching out to someone who kind of knows about the field to get further suggestions is a really good idea.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Moving into the end here, and I'm just curious, do you have any additional resources, like websites, books, apps, anything like that maybe parents could pick up and use at home?
Yeah, for sure. I have some of my favorite books here.
Oh, okay.
For you guys want to do some reading, I'll tell you all about them. So for the parent who really wants to do a deep dive on these, these are some really great books that I think are really helpful and giving a whole lot more information about executive function than I could, as well as some plans for interventions. Not the lightest reads, but you might really feel like these really resonate with your child and what their experiencing. And these books give a lot of action steps I think are great.
All right,
so
that's perfect.
I really like this one, That Crumpled Paper, that was due last week. And it is technically about helping disorganized and distracted boys, but it's also great for disorganized and distracted girls.
Okay.
So this is a super good one. And then Peg Dawson is basically the executive function guru. And these are two fantastic books. Smart But Scattered is really, really a great read about how to boost your child's ability to improve with these skills. She has a lot of really great strategies and ways that you can implement change by getting systems into place that are going to be long-term systems and take a long time, but can be effective. Another great one is just Peg Dawson, Executive Function Skills in Children and Adults. This is especially good if you are an educator out there. This is really good and has a lot of different applicable strategies you can use when working with students or in the classroom that I really love. So these are great reads for parents who really felt like, wow, that was my student. I feel like I need more about it.
Okay.
I also recommend, of course, just there are a lot of apps that can help with productivity. I mean, Google is the best, right? I am obsessed with Google Calendar.
Same.
I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't have
Gmail.
Google Calendar, seriously. So, if your child likes online calendars, I think really getting Google Calendar system working for them is super fantastic. You can schedule classes, events, everything. I also absolutely love the new Google Task integration with Google Calendar, how now you can have tasks in your Google Calendar and check them off. So that's like a really great task management tool for students, and a really great way to keep schedules organized. There's also lots of different apps online that can help with different things. Like if your student is, really struggling to stay focused during homework time, which is what a lot of students of the executive function might struggle with, I recommend a lot of really great website blocker apps like Forest or Freedom are some great ones where you can specifically
I like Forest,
type in. Yeah, I feel like grows a little tree.
Yeah,
so like,
grows a tree.
You can like type in the websites you don't want to be allowed during a specific amount of time. And it's good for a student to kind of decide that on their own without like a parent just saying you're going to do this, so they can kind of self-reflect on it. I also love, there's tons of great Pomodoro timers online, which are just like a great timer that helps kind of space out work in like a 25-minute work interval, a 5-minute break, 25-minute work. And this can be a good way for students to like stay on task and stay focused. Those are some of my favorite tech tools. I also do recommend games for executive function. Executive function skills are skills that, like we said, are not natural and inherent for lots of students, but they can be developed. And a great way to do it is with games.
Okay.
I have a list of holiday gift
All right,
guide
holidays
lists.
right around the corner.
Yeah, I don't know if this will be posted.
A
Holiday gift guides, so maybe I can give it to you to share out to your audience.
Yeah, I put all the resources in the description, so I'll make sure it gets there.
So I've got it. Yeah, some of my favorite executive function games I recommend, because some of your classic board games really do work on executive function skills, like Clue, Jenga, right? Like Settlers of Catan, if you had that game, Simon. There's tons more of these like really fun games that actually utilize a lot of these executive function skills in a really fun way. So why not improve your executive function skills with your whole family, right?
Yeah, everyone has fun, enjoy.
So those are some of my biggest tips and recommendations.
Okay, awesome. All right, so finally, if anyone wants to find you on the internet, I mean, I know you mentioned your email just a minute ago, but if you have Instagram or anything like that, where can they find you?
You can find me online. We have a new website, summitlearning.la. Brand new, so I'm excited.
All right, amazing.
You can also reach me at hannahross.edtherapy@gmail.com or on Instagram at hross.edtherapy, where I do share executive function tips, other tips for working with students with learning differences. So those are great ways to reach me, and always happy to talk with families who are just trying to figure out what's the best next step for their family. If that is educational therapy, executive function coaching, or something else altogether, I'm always happy to kind of brainstorm, because I know, especially in this current time, it's really difficult to know what the best way to support your child is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be really tough. There's a lot of information out there floating around, so that's great that you can help out with all that.
Yeah.
All right, Hannah. Well, thank you so much for coming on Parenting. That was really great, and I think you really explained executive functioning very well. So hopefully all the parents at home now know what it's all about.
Yeah, and kind of think about executive function as you go forward in today. Like, what executive function skills did you use doing that task? You'll be surprised how much you think about it and how much these skills come up in our daily lives.
Oh, awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we get to see you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. There you have it. Hannah was an amazing guest, shared a lot of great stuff about executive functioning. So I hope you learned a lot. I also wanted to add a couple of my favorite resources for executive functioning. One, there's an app on your phone called Habitica. And it's kind of cool because it's like has to-do lists, it has like calendaring events, and then it also has like building habits. So you can do to-do lists where you like check off stuff, but then you can also just have like daily habits. So like make my bed or something like that, brush my teeth, and then every time you complete that task, you just like click yes, I completed it, and then it doesn't like disappear like a to-do list. It like just keeps showing up, and then you just keep clicking it. But the cool thing about Habitica is that it's like gamified. So you create a little character, and then every time you complete a task, you get points. And then you can use those points to buy like, spells or different costumes and all that stuff. So it makes it a little more fun than just being like, oh, I have to do another like to-do list. Like you're like, oh, I check that off, I get points. So it could be a little fun way to gamify all this executive functioning stuff for your kids. So that's a fun app that I use. Hannah also mentioned that board games are a great way to build executive functioning skills. And she mentioned one, which is called Settlers of Catan. And I've played it. And that, I think, would be a fantastic game to learn about executive functioning because there's a lot of planning and strategizing involved. It's a little more advanced, so it's not like Jenga or whatever where you're just like pulling blocks out. But she said you could also do that. But when I'm just thinking like, oh, Settlers of Catan, because you have to like decide all like how to gather resources and then how to use your resources adequately. So it's very much a strategy game. So it could be really great for like building that planning muscle. And again, it's fun. So just like Habitica, gamifying things a little bit, make it fun, make it engaging. And then people are going to be more willing to participate. So that's all we have on pandemic parenting for today. Thank you again so much for watching. And of course, if you ever want to reach me, my name is Greg, and you can reach me at greg@thinkandevolve.academy. I always love hearing questions or comments about the show. Tell me what you want to hear next, what kind of experts you'd like me to interview next, and we will address that in the future. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you again soon.